Lavo, larutz, lashir. So many really common words, and it's hard to figure out what binyan they are or how to conjugate them. That's what I'll be talking about today on Hebrew Grammar Help. Welcome back to Hebrew Grammar Help. I'm Sapir coming at you from downtown Portland, Oregon. Last week on Hebrew Grammar Help, I went through the regular pa'al conjugations, but this week I wanted to talk about binyan pa'al, gizrat Ayin Yod, and gizrat Ayin Vav. This means that the middle letter of the shoresh is either a Yod or a Vav. And when you have a shoresh like that in binyan pa'al, those two letters act like a vowel. So it kind of messes up the entire conjugation. So let's start with the infinitive. Remember, this is the regular infinitive. The lamed has a chirik, and then the three shoresh letters with a chola maleh between the last two. Our example verb was always lichtov. Ayin Vav and Ayin Yod look so different that it's hard to even recognize them as a pa'al verb. So in the infinitive, the lamed gets a kamatz, and then we just write the three letters of the shoresh, and that middle one is always going to act as a vowel, usually u or e. So one of the common verbs on the Ayin Vav side is the verb latus, which means to fly in an airplane. And so we just add our tet, our vav, and our samech, and we have latus. Now, one really common verb that's a little bit different is lavo, which means to come. And it has an o sound instead of an u sound. And that is supposedly because of the aleph that comes right after the vav. Also, notice that there is no dagesh on this first shoresh letter. So it's lavo, not labo. And this goes for all of the letters, but of course it only matters for bet, kaf, and pei. And on the Ayin Yod side, it's basically the same template, with the lamed getting a kamatz, and then just the three letters, and the Yod in the middle is amplifying the chirik that's under the first shoresh letter. So the Yod does not get a vowel of its own. It doesn't really sound like a Y. It's just there showing you that there's an E sound there. So some examples are lasim, which means to put, lariv, which means to quarrel or argue, and lashir, which means to sing. All right, moving on to present tense. Remember, these are the regular pa'al verbs. They get an o-e vowel pattern, and then there's also the feminine singular gets an et suffix. But Ayin Yod and Ayin Vav verbs are really super different. So when we look at a template like this, the first thing that we might notice is, hey, what happened to that orange box? That's right, the box is gone. That middle letter completely drops out in the present tense. So for all the present tense templates, and of course this is really true for every word in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, is that the first letter, if the first letter of a word is a begad kafat letter, it's going to have a dagesh. And so that's also true in these present tense templates. So I put that dagesh in the template, but it does get deleted technically if your first letter is not a begad kafat letter. But of course, most of us would never know this or care because we are adults and we don't write with nikud. We just need to remember to pronounce it correctly. So either a B sound or a K sound or a P sound. And then also for all four present tense templates, the first letter is going to have a kamatz under it, sounding like a. And then this letter is going to be followed by the last shoresh letter. Remember that middle letter is just completely deleted. So if the subject is masculine, then we're done here. We have tas or gar or ratz or ba or sam or rav or shar. Feminine singular gets an a suffix written as a kamatz and then a hey. So this varies from the regular pa'al verbs that the feminine singular gets an et ending. So tasa, gara, ratza, ba'a, sama, rava, shara. And then masculine plural gets its typical im ending. So a chirik under the final letter of the shoresh, followed by a yod and then a mem sofit. And these definitely have the stress on the last syllable. So we have tasim, garim, ratzim, ba'im, samim, ravim, sharim. And then feminine plural also gets its typical ot ending with a cholam, maleh, and then a taf. And again, everything is stressed on the last syllable. So tasot, garot, ratzot, ba'ot, samot, ravot, sharot. Moving on to past tense. Here are the regular templates. We see the 3 shoresh letters with a vowels in between, and then the past tense suffixes that match the subject of the verb. And now when we see this set of templates, we hopefully immediately notice that there is no orange box once again. The middle letter of the shoresh again does not show up in the past tense. So they all have a dagesh on the first letter if it's a begad kafat letter, and that first shoresh letter also has a patach under it. And now at one time the patach and the kamatz sounded really different, but nowadays in most of the dialects of modern Hebrew, they sound exactly the same. And this is not to say that if you hear somebody who says them differently, that their dialect is wrong or bad or anything like that. It's just not quite as common. So let's look at the conjugations for 3 verbs, starting with latus. We have tasti, tasta, tast, hu tas, he tasa, tasnu, tastem, tasten, and hem vehen tasu. And of course, the dagesh has disappeared because tet is not a begad kafat letter. You might think it's the T of kafat, but it's not. That is a taf, not a tet. Moving on. So we see that in the first and second person, the third shoresh letter, the purple one, has a schwa. And then we have the personal suffix. For third person masculine, there's no suffix, and there's also no schwa on that last letter. And the third person feminine has a kamatz, and then we add a hey at the end. And then the third person plural has a shuruk after that last shoresh letter. All right, for lavo, we do have the dagesh in the green box because bet is a begad kafat letter. And notice that we're missing the schwa under the aleph. The aleph is silent and the schwa is silent. So I guess whoever made this decision decided that there should be no schwa. We still need the aleph because it is a shoresh letter. But the dagesh and the lack of a schwa don't matter because, again, we are adults and we don't write with nikud. So we have bati, bata, bat, huba, hiba'a, banu, batem, baten, and hem vehen ba'u. And for lasim, we have no dagesh because sin is not a begad kafat letter. So we have samti, samta, samt, husam, hisama, samnu, samtem, samten, and hem vehen samu. Moving on to future tense. And just to remind you, here are the regular future tense templates. And remember, future tense almost always rhymes with the infinitive. And so the personal prefix almost always gets the same vowel as the letter lamed in the infinitive. And that is true for Ayin Vav and Ayin Yod verbs as well. The lamed of the infinitive gets a kamatz, and the prefix of the future tense also gets a kamatz. And now, in contrast with the present and the past tense, which lose that middle shoresh letter, all of the future tense forms maintain the middle shoresh letter. And remember, with the regular future verbs, when there was a suffix, they lost their O sound. So it was tichtov, but tichtevi. But with these verbs, the vav is maintained even when there is a suffix. So let's look at latus, to fly. We have atus, tatus, tatusi, yatus, tatus, natus, tatusu, and yatusu. Lavo is very similar, except that, of course, the vav sounds like an O instead of like an U. So we have avo, tavo, tavoi, yavo, tavo, navo, tavou, and yavou. And with Ayin Yod verbs, of course, the prefix gets a kamatz, and then the first shoresh letter has a chirik under it, which is lengthened by the yod. I keep saying that it's lengthened, but that's kind of a technical lengthening. It doesn't really sound any longer than a chirik without a yod. The important thing is that the yod doesn't sound like a Y sound. It doesn't get a vowel of its own. It's just there sounding like E. So we have asim, tasim, tasimi, yasim, tasim, nasim, tasimu, and yasimu. All right, imperative. So if you remember regular pa'al imperatives, we use the proper future tense, and then we take off that taf prefix and then kind of maneuver the word to follow Hebrew phonology rules. And so these are the templates for the regular imperative. And it's the same with Ayin Vav and Ayin Yod verbs, except that it's a little bit simpler because there will never be a situation where there might be two schwas in a row at the very beginning of the word. So we start with the future, we take off the taf. All we have to remember is to add a dagesh, or since we're adults and we don't write with nikud, we just say it as if it has a dagesh. So here are the future forms of latus, tatus, tatusi, and tatusu. We lop off the initial taf, and so we don't need a dagesh because tet is not a bagat kafat letter, and so we have tus, tusi, and tusu. And here are the future forms of lavo. We have tavo, tavoi, and tavou. We lop off the taf, and then because bet is a begad kafat letter, we add that dagesh and we say bo, boi, and bou. And it's the same with Ayin Yod verbs. We take the future templates, we lop off the taf prefix, and we add a dagesh if we need to, and voila. So our sample verb is lasim, which means to put. So in the future, it's tasim, tasimi, and tasimu. We lop off the taf prefix, and we don't put a dagesh because sin is not a begad kafat letter. And so we have sim, simi, and simu. Now, you might remember that in the previous video, I said that we don't normally actually use these imperative forms. It's really, really common to just use the future tense when we are trying to ask or tell somebody to do something. But I will say that with these verbs, I do hear them much, much more frequently with the imperative than with the future as the imperative. As for a verbal noun template, the Shem Peula, I'm not convinced that there is a regular Shem Peula template for these types of verbs. I asked around in some groups. I actually never learned a template for these in any of my Hebrew classes, and that suggests that there isn't actually one. More evidence that there isn't one is that when I went looking around, I had to actually, pealim.com does not list the verbal noun when it's giving all of the conjugation. So I had to look for it myself, like shoresh by shoresh. And I found maybe 3 or 4 different templates that were all pretty widespread, and there wasn't a single one that really stood out more than the rest. So if you want to make a verbal noun of one of these verbs, you're just going to have to look it up or ask someone. I do want to mention that there are some Ayin Vav and Ayin Yod verbs that do not follow this template. But one thing I noticed is that of all of these, they had a problem letter in the 3rd position as well. So out of those 14, there were 10 that had a hey or a yod as their 3rd shoresh letter. Of course, the Academia says it's a yod, Pealim says it's a hey. And then there were 2 with a chet, 1 with a nun, and 1 with an ayin. So I do plan to do a separate video about these 14 weird verbs, but that'll be a separate video. They're not super common, but I know that I have seen at least 4 of them out in the wild. So as promised, here is a list of Ayin Vav verbs. And here's a list of Ayin Yod verbs. You can see that Ayin Vav is clearly the bigger group. So that's it for today. Now you know all of the verb forms for binyan pa'al, gizrot, Ayin Vav, and Ayin Yod. If you have any questions or feedback, leave it in the comments and I will do my best to respond. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and press the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot papa'am haba'a. See you next time.